Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. We've got another great episode today. It is with me, yours truly, the host, just talking today. So I hope you enjoy. So the first big news I want to break is that Chet Hanks, he is the wigger son of Tom Hanks. I think he's an aspiring rapper and actor, has declared it White Boy Summer for the upcoming season. This is a big news. You know, white boys have not had a lot of wins lately. It's time we're finally getting some love. Chet Hanks is not a conservative or right winger in any shape or form. He is just a standard winger. It's funny that he's Tom Hanks' son, contrasts sharply with his actor father. But yes, he declared it White Boy Summer. He said it's not like Donald Trump, white boy. It's something else. It's something smooth and nice. And he has even issued some rules and regulations. And none of the rules and regulations stipulate respecting women or avoiding racism. It just, you have to avoid looking preppy. I mean, I think I tweeted this out, is that I don't think I would qualify for White Boy Summer because it's like, you can't wear Sperry's. Like, I always wear Sperry's. Can't wear plaid or Vineyard Vibes or Ralph or Polo. That's pretty much everything I wear. I don't have any salmon shorts. He also outlawed salmon shorts, but... I sympathize with people who wear salmon shorts. So I'm not necessarily sure I can fit in with White Boy Summer, but I respect it and I'm glad we're going to have it. And maybe we'll get to define our own rules and regulations for White Boy Summer. But in the meantime, it is not White Boy Spring. We're experiencing a lot of insanity right now. It's not going to be really news for me to tell the listeners this, but there's a lot of anti-white hate out there. And it's only growing more and more that people can't even ignore it. I think a lot of conservatives are starting to acknowledge this, especially with the light of what we're seeing in recent news events. I mean, you saw all of white America blamed for the Atlanta spa shootings, which just one weird dude who had a sex addiction decided to shoot up some Asian spas, and he happened to kill a few Asians at these places, and somehow white America was to blame. The Root had a viral article saying whiteness is a pandemic and we must exterminate it in the same way we wipe out a pandemic. That's normal rhetoric now in the United States of America. And you see this that, anytime that a white person does something bad, they'll immediately blame all of white America for this. But we see it's not necessarily the news, but yes, you're seeing it even more, in your face right now. Like, it's not even denial. Like, that right after the week that we saw the Atlanta spa shootings, we last week had a crazed Muslim gunman who had a problem with white people, who always saw racism everywhere, killed 10 white people. And now when they were saying the Atlanta spa shooting had, the guy clearly said that there was no racism involved. He just had a sex addiction and, this is the first place he chose. He happened to be white. Some of the victims happened to be Asian. And, the media said it doesn't matter about his motivations. We shouldn't believe his motivations. The victims and the perpetrator, that's what matters, and it's a white perpetrator, some Asian victims, thus it's racism. And then we had this whole outpouring of support for Asians who, even though they're the most educated, wealthiest ethnic group in America, they're suffering under oppression because in elementary school, they remember some kid on the bus saying, ching chong, ching chong. There was even an NBC, I think it was NBC News report, where some Asian reporter tracked down some white kids who bullied her in the early 90s and was demanding to know if they're better people. And of course, these guys are getting hounded by a national news outlet. And they're like, we're really sorry that we we slanted our eyes on the school bus for you. And we're sorry for the trauma. And it's this isn't real oppression at all. And even as we've talked about it before, all these anti-Asian attacks that are occurring aren't by white people, it's by blacks. There was a story where these two black women went into an Atlanta beauty shop in Houston and they beat the crap out of her and said, we should steal from them because they're Asians. Why are Asians in a black market? And they beat the crap out of them. And of course, when they got arrested, they were like, we got racially profiled. And they were even trying to defend. They nearly ran over some of the family that owns this business when they were fleeing, and yet they would say that this isn't their fault. So we are seeing this like happen just a regular basis of this just outpouring of anti-white, racism that just occurs naturally. And then people will believe the worst things about white people because we're being inundated with this anti-white propaganda day in, day out. And when something, counters that, when say, a non-white shooter kills 10 people in Boulder, Colorado in a grocery store, it's like, oh, it's just having a bad day. But if a white person happens to kill any minority, that is the fault of white supremacy in white America. And so, as I said before, I mean, conservatives are noticing this, but they're not using the strongest words possible. I mean, a few people will, dip their toes into it, like Tucker Carlson, Matt Walsh, a few others. They will say like anti-white racism, but usually they'll use like terms like intersectionality or this is just leftism. Or this is moral relativism. That's always a favorite one, even though, of course, the left is hyper moral. They'll always use this, but it's anti-white racism. This is the glue that ties everything together, is that we live in a country where the majority population is seen as evil, and the need to dispossess them is the guiding principle of our rulers, of the political left. And, this is what guides everything in our country right now. And I think that a lot of normal white conservatives who would have said, oh, I'm colorblind, I just want to be like Martin Luther King and judge people on the content of their character, not on their skin color, they're realizing that's no longer going to work, as they're seeing the critical race theory taught in their schools with their kids, like being taught that to hate themselves for being white. And we get like news stories every week and day about this. I mean, Christopher Rufo, who had probably been a normal conservative, just a few years ago, he's the one exposing it. I mean, he does incredible research work showing like these schools teaching the most insane stuff. And he always couch it with like, we just need to return to merit-based education and just see people as individuals. And that's just not going to work. I mean, the thing we have to realize is that we as white Americans are the enemy to them. And while we may not define ourselves as white, or we may not like want to be grouped into a white American category, that's how our enemies place us. And the only way we're going to get out of this situation is to see ourselves as a group and to start operating as a group, because this is how they treat us. They see us as a collective whole. Well, it's time for us to act like it. And then we'll finally, end this anti-white racism. Stop demonizing our heritage. Stop, tearing down statues. Stop teaching our kids to hate themselves. And only in this way can we see ourselves as a group with a certain type of moral status, a moral purpose in order to defend ourselves, to say that like our lives matter too, just something simple in that nature is what we have to do. I mean, a lot of people have always said like, well, white doesn't really exist as a necessary category and yada, yada, yada. I mean, as a universal whole, maybe that's so, but in American context, white means something. And it's not necessarily just based on skin color. I mean, it does come with culture and many other things to define it, just like any other ethnicity. But it is an ethnic group in America. But it's the only one ethnic group that refuses to see itself as an ethnic group. They did a recent survey showing that all the races were asked how they view other group, and every other group like viewing themselves as the best. Like Asians, Hispanic, and blacks always had the highest self-regard for themselves, and then the lowest regard for whites. And with whites, it was truly colorblind. It was like totally equal in how they viewed all the races. And it did change with white conservatives versus white liberals. I mean, white conservatives had a slight tendency to favor white people. White liberals actually had a strong tendency to disfavor their own people. White liberals are the only people who hate themselves, and this is how they want all of us to act like. So this is the country we live in. This is what we have to deal with. And I think, there is we're going to touch on this a moment about our current zeitgeist we're living in. But the moment is tending towards more racial tension, racial conflict. And I think it is becoming abundantly clear to normie Americans, ordinary conservatives, that anti-white racism is the motivation behind their political enemies. and that will result in a changing sense of consciousness, and I think that will go in our direction. One of the things that is a result of this overbearing anti-white racism is how people will believe the most ridiculous things about history and current society there is. I mean, there will always be these viral tweets like from black people like they made us, they turned us into lampshades. They'll take like things that are ascribed to the Holocaust. So a lot of these are kind of, not necessarily based in fact, and they'll say, oh, this happened in slavery. They used our hair for clothing. They skinned us alive, and none of these things are necessarily true. There's not really any evidence, but you'll have like 50,000 retweets on this, and this goes into and this is not necessarily just black Twitter. This will be like credible journalists and historians like, oh, this has a point. And the most ridiculous example we witnessed, this didn't come from black Twitter, this came from a deranged white person, is that this woman tweeted last week. She said that my father was a grand wizard in the Rockport, Texas Ku Klux Klan, and he single-handedly murdered 30 Vietnamese strippers off of Rockport, Texas with just a knife. And everyone's like, oh, this is awful. This is horrible. And there were several people. Torre, who is a former MSNBC host, he gets published by mainstream outlets, was like, whoa, this is real. And there was NBC reporters, and I think a PBS reporter who were in her replies, this woman's replies, being like, oh, we would love to talk about this story. Can you please tell us? And there was and it even caused some weird controversy because there were several Asians and who were like, oh, wow, another case of us showing we're oppressed. Because I have to say is like Asians, liberals probably love the fact that they can now pretend that they're a victim of racism and join the people of color coalition that they've desperately wanted to join. They want to show that they're not white, and they love these stories of somehow a grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in 1976 butchering over 30 Vietnamese shrimpers with just a knife. And so they were elevating it, but then they didn't like the fact that it was centering on the white woman's pain, and it must center on the people of color who were harmed by this. And of course they all believe the story. Just seeing the story at hand, like it automatically became a copy pasta among the right. I was seeing a bunch of funny accounts, like Evan Platinum was saying about like how their father was a grand magus in Riverhold in this Skyrim video game, and he killed like over 30 elves and or orcs or something. And people were making, I mean, it was like a really funny content that where people were doing it because it's like a total lie. But there was journalists who were credibly believing this and serious people. And, if you're looking at the story, the father, if you look, I pointed out that this is like a higher body count than any Friday the 13th movie. If you look at like the ones with the highest body count, I think it's part 4, which has like 18 people killed. And Friday, Freddy, or I almost called him Freddy Krueger. Of course it's Jason Voorhees. Jason Voorhees is like a part demonic creature that cannot be killed by normal weapons. Like if you shoot him, he keeps going. And he's able to sneak up behind people despite being like 6'8", 300 pounds. And this is of course a horror movie, and he would only kill 18 people when he's a machete and he's supernatural. And, they can't kill him with bullets. But somehow this one Klansman gets aboard a Vietnamese shrimper ship with just a rusty knife and is able to kill all 30 of them. I don't know how the 30 of them couldn't restrain him or throw him off the boat. And it's also not like this would have been covered up in 1970s America. This wouldn't have been covered up at any point in the United States history, this kind of mass murder. And it's not going to be like, wow, we had a shrimping boat out in the sea and it didn't come back, and all 30 of them came back with stab wounds, and this didn't, somehow this didn't register with the police. But yeah, this is the credibility gap. They will believe any horrible thing about white people and say that this is not past them. Like white supremacy in the 1970s killed over 30 Vietnamese shrimpers, and nobody cared about it. That's not the case. I mean, even if one Vietnamese stripper was killed by a white supremacist, that would have been probably national news. and would have drawn like the FBI's attention. Like, there's no way on earth that this would have never been a news story. But they will believe the worst thing. So you could just make up. Like, I mean, we go from hate hoax to hate hoax to hate hoax. There's no amount of hate hoaxery that will convince them to stop believing this bullshit. They will continue to believe it, and yeah, so this is as I keep saying, this is the country we live in. And we're going to learn more about how, random white supremacists were turning into slasher movie villains and slaughtering dozens and dozens of people. And the police would just shrug their shoulders like, oh, well, it's a Vietnamese shrimper. We're not going to do anything about it. At the time that we see that white people are responsible for every bad thing and that they're so evil and we deserve to condemn them and demonize them, there's a lot of black misbehavior and otherwise non-white misbehavior that they try to rationalize and try to ignore what's going on. And there's really this case from Washington, D.C., this carjacking, which is a microcosm of pretty much everything we're starting to see in American society, is that two black female teenagers carjacked a Pakistani immigrant's he was an Uber Eats driver. They carjacked him while he was driving around. And this is like in the middle of the afternoon. This is like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. This is not late at night. And they did this on a busy street with a lot of pedestrians watching. And they just released a pedestrian video of this. I think the pedestrian's actually a guardsman. And this guy, they're on and they're like shouting at him, and they got their stun gun. They're using a stun gun to intimidate and threaten the driver. And the driver is trying to beg for help. He's like, they're stealing my car. They're carjacking my car. Please help. Please help. And then the guardsmen are like, this is supposed to be our national defense right here. They're standing around. They're just watching this guy get like stunned with a stun gun. And they're just watching. They're taping it. It's like, okay, we're calling police. And then they drive off. They speed off. They crash. The car wrecks. The guy's flown out. He's laying face down, dead. And the two black girls get out of the car. They're totally fine. They don't give a shit that they just killed somebody. And they're like, I need to get my phone in the car. And the guardsmen are like, we're setting up a perimeter. And they're not really doing anything. They did absolutely nothing to prevent this crime from happening. And now they're just like setting up a perimeter as these black women are trying to go back in the vehicle to get their phone. And these, of course, are people who helped murder a Pakistani immigrant Uber Eats driver just for his car. And when this happened, this is something so abundant and like so repulsive behavior. Because, I mean, you want to see that like when people do something bad, that there's like a level of remorse. There was completely zero remorse here. And these two girls probably be like, it's not our fault. He carjacked us. I mean, they're both 15 and 13. I don't know how they would have had a car. But they would have probably made this argument if, there wasn't 30 people around who had just seen them try to steal the car. I mean, even then they would have probably said it was like his fault. It's like, oh, he wrecked us. We didn't wreck the car. And so there's no remorse there. And then like people are like wondering why this is. They're like, oh, once again, they're talking about moral relativism, breakdown of values. I saw somebody who was like saying, citing Aleister Crowley, to do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And I'm like, I don't think black people are reading Aleister Crowley. And so there's all these assumptions and arguments, but they were noticing that these were the people who did this were black. And this upset many of the liberal journalists. There was Hunter Walker, who he's Yahoo News White House correspondent, who's a really ugly human being. He's like really short, just like disgusting person, repulsive, gross, you would say, if you look up any pictures. And he's always been like a repulsive individual in how he operates. And this guy was going off about like, I'm noticing a lot of conservative figures notice that the perpetrators were black. And it's like, yeah. What about it? We've spent like several weeks talking about how like some suspect in a crime is white, and this proves white supremacy, from the Atlanta spa shootings to the Capitol protests. We've been going on this psychotic demonization of white people just because of a few bad apples, or some like people believing that some event is proof that white people are about to murder everyone. And then we see a horrible case of black misbehavior that resulted in a death of somebody who's not even white. And they're just like, if you really want to honor this immigrant's life and show that it mattered, you don't want to attack the criminals. It's like, okay, what killed him? Systemic racism? And they probably will nod their head and say, yeah, systemic racism killed him. And they're going to start using these explanations more and more because we are going to see more black criminality and non-white criminality in general because crime rates are skyrocketing. I mean, our murder rates are now at 25-year highs. We're at a rate that we haven't seen since the mid-90s. I mean, they'll always say, well, not every crime is up. And it's like, well, there's a lot of crime. I mean, the most important crime is up and carjackings are up everywhere. I mean, it's not just Washington, D.C. I mean, it's happening in Minneapolis, I think in the Pacific Northwest. I think San Francisco is having a problem with carjackings. Chicago is another place with carjacking problem. It's not just Washington, D.C., and these are crimes that affect people. Like it's like a pretty traumatic event to be carjacked. To say the least about murder, you're not going to be around much longer after that. And people are going to, and due to the prevalence of cell phones, we're going to see more of these videos. And we're going to see more of this lack of remorse from a lot of these black criminals who, harm innocent people. They just don't care. And I think even a worse case happened down in Alabama last week is that there was this black street racer who swerved over into a white grandmother's lane, hit her, killed the grandmother, and she wrecked the car and she fled the scene. She was later arrested. This woman's name is Carmesia Flanagan. When she was first arrested, according to police, she denied she claimed that her car was stolen and she was in Atlanta, and the police found clear evidence that no, the car was not stolen. She was not in Atlanta. She was the one driving it. So she lied first there. And then she was booked, released on bail. And then she made two 20-minute Facebook videos attacking the victim where she said that it wasn't her fault. That old ass lady swerved into my lane. And then she at one point said about the grandmother, yes, she's dead. She's dead, all right. And she's dead because of her own motherfucking self. She ran into my lane. This is how there was no remorse at all. And local news outlets interviewed the victim's relatives and they were like, this really hurts. Like, this is humiliating to see, this killer released on bail and her to have total lack of remorse and just mocking the victim. And you're going to see more of this. And the media will not necessarily in these cases where it's so abundantly clear that this is a horrible person and these people have no remorse and it's on video. But you are going to see more cases where they, blacks will come up with some excuse to say that they're not responsible for this. And you will see outlets believe them. As I was saying earlier about the Houston story about the two black women who attacked Asian store owners, the local news outlet did an interview with them, and these two humongous women were just they're masked up, and they're like, we felt we were racially profiled, and we think we had no choice but to try to run them over. They were in our way, and they're caught in video viciously beating this old Asian woman for no reason at all. I mean, it's really brutal video where they scratched her face and everything. And they will even say we're not responsible. We're not at fault. And the local media will give them a hearing. You would never hear that from if the Atlanta spa shooter wanted to give his reason for why he shot these people. No media outlet on earth would give them the type of objective journalism that they would deliver to these black criminals who will just like make up any reason for why they did this. So we're going to begin to see a lot of this, and there will be a lot of these explanations like, I guess the Frankfurt School, like blacks were reading, Adorno or Marcuse, and this is why they no longer see their crimes as bad. And it's not really that. It's like, it's how black culture has developed over time. I mean, these people will there is a quest to avoid any blame and make excuses for their behavior. Now, the rest of society, they can do this. I mean, they have the right to do that. We're theoretically a free country, but not anymore. They can say whatever they want, but the rest of society doesn't need to indulge this and needs to condemn it and laugh at it and mock it and actually be angry that they would even say this. But we live in a society right now where there are, these idiotic journalists who will believe them, like, oh, that's so true. You were racially profiled. You had to beat up that lady. Now, if this was a white person that they had done that to, I think you would have seen much more believability in that. But the fact that, we now have the main narrative about anti-Asian racism, there's these conflicting stories with it. It's a battle of narratives that are going on. We're going to see, on a last point on that, we're definitely going to see a lot of these cases emerge because the New York Police Department is putting out undercover Asian victims who are actually police officers. And I guarantee you we're going to see some story where anti-Asian hate and police racism collide in the story, because there'll probably be some black person who attacks one of these undercover Asian victims, and they, use excessive force, so to speak, on the suspect. And you're going to see these narratives totally collide. And, it's going to be very uncomfortable for them. That's why they have to blame everything on white people, because if they looked at the true nature of crime and the true nature of a lot of social ills, it's not necessarily going to come down on white Americans. Now, to conclude on a lot of the general topic here is, I want to say, I don't think I want to repeat myself, I don't think it's a white boy spring. I think we're seeing a anti-white boy spring. But hopefully in the summer, we begin to appreciate white boys, and we see, that there's great qualities about us that people will admire, whether we're wearing plaid or we're wearing just a simple black shirt, as Chet Hanks recommends. White boys are okay. It's okay to be white, and maybe we'll finally accept that. But yeah, actually, second thought, I don't think we're going to have white boy summer. I think we're going to have, it's going to be a similar summer that we had last year. We're going to have very bad race riots. Probably the crime level is going to continue to go up. Return to normalcy is not on the horizon. And that's the next thing I want to get into, is that there were several people, and it wasn't just people on the left and liberals. There was a lot of right-wingers, too, who kept claiming that with Biden in office, everything would return to normal. We would hit the rewind button to 2014. We'd all get along. There wouldn't be any of these riots. Antifa would magically disappear. Crime would go down. Coronavirus would even go away. We had everything that, the Trump era witnessed would just seep away. We'd all just get along. We could get on with our lives. Well, if you've been paying attention for the last 3 months, it's gotten worse ever since Trump left office. We've got a massive border crisis that is sending tens of thousands of migrants across into our country. And there's more planning to come. I mean, there was a Gallup poll that was released last week that showed 42 million Latin Americans want to come to America. And pretty much Biden is putting nothing in place to stop them. I mean, they're limiting border patrol. They're limiting border security. They're effectively handcuffing ICE so they can't deport or detain anyone. And their solution to all these problems is just to pretend that it's all Trump's fault and we just need to be nicer to migrants. So we've got the immigration crisis going on. Crime is getting worse. Like the murder rate that was happening in 2020, it was not an aberration. The murder rates continue a dramatic effect. Pretty much in every major city, murder rates are way higher than they were last year around this time. So they would have said, well, it occurred around last summer. Well, what happened last summer? Well, yeah, we had race riots that pushed law enforcement back out of these cities. That's why we're having this massive crime wave. And they're not returning. I was seeing some reports that saying, well, with the nicer weather and COVID, over, maybe we'll have a crime decline in the summer. It's like, it's the opposite. There's always a crime increase in the summer. And, depending on how the Derek Chauvin trial goes, we're in for a very wild summer. Even if Derek Chauvin gets convicted, I think there'll still be riots and disturbances, because just about any police officer shooting of a black person will trigger riots. And the other thing that's not returning is the economy. I mean, the economy has severe troubles right now, and and people are starting to see the effect of lockdown. I mean, there's several videos. You see a lot of these TikTok videos of people going out. It's like, oh, I can go out now. The lockdown's over. Let me go to my favorite restaurant, and everything is closed. And that's gonna that's an effect that's going to last for a while. That's not going to go away. And we're just seeing, and also mass shootings are rising. We weren't really witnessing that over the last couple of years. Now we're having like one every week. There was even one that was stopped, I think it was also in Atlanta, or as another southern city, where it's a black shooter who had tons of firearms. He was loading them up in a grocery store, and he was only stopped because like one person was in the stall, and it's like somebody's loading up firearms, and they send in a police unit to stop him. So we're gonna witnessing more of that type of violence. I mean, it's getting much crazier out there, and also even on a political sphere, it's they're Democrats are effectively demanding an abolishment of our constitutional rights. They wanting more domestic spying. There was a story last week from Defense One where they were interviewed. These generals testified. I believe it was. I think it was the Senate Armed Forces Committee, but don't hold me to that. And the whole committee was like, "Yeah, can we have more domestic spying because we think Russia and China are a big threat? We need the domestic spying expanded in order to protect our national security." So they want more domestic surveillance. They want limitations on free speech. They're trying to eliminate certain Republican lawmakers. I mean, there was a bill to expel Marjorie Taylor Greene from Congress, which a lot of Democrats wanted to support, and they of course stripped her of her committee assignments, and that was pretty much a party line vote, except for 10 or 11 Republicans who voted to strip her of her committee assignments. So, politics is as volatile as it ever was, even more volatile than probably even in the Trump years. And this is all being overseen by a doddering old man who's, in severe mental decline. I think even though journalists continue to lie about Biden's mental state, we witnessed it at his press conference, and all these troubles like, oh, we turned our wary eyes to you, Uncle Joe, and he's there. And he's got extremely detailed notes, and he cannot say any statement without looking down at his notes, and he'll have to look around. And even they had this identifying list for reporters to call on with like their pictures and big, they have big pictures of themselves, their names in big type. And this is what he has to go. And they're like, and a whole profile of them. Well, Trump would just like call on somebody. He would like, oh, I can tell that's a fake news reporter. I'm not going to call on him. Oh, that's a person who likes me. I'm going to call on them. They kept saying that like Trump's in mental decline. He's senile. And we're seeing this like actual president who cannot make any basic statement without consulting his notes. So this is all getting crazy. Like there is no return to normalcy. Like this is our new normal. And, we're not going to come together. People kept claiming that Biden was going to bring us all together over what? I'm not sure, but he was. I guess over civility and decency, which there's not really any civility and decency we're witnessing. But this was what was going to happen, and we were all supposed to expected to believe this. One of the funniest things that they try to claim is that Antifa would disappear, that all these like Black Lives Matter riots and everything would go away. And Antifa has only tightened their grip over the Pacific Northwest. We haven't necessarily seen too many riots from other places. I mean, there's been a couple of aggressive demonstrations in New York and a few other cities. But it really is, they still control like Portland and Seattle and a couple of other towns in Washington and Oregon. And people were like, oh, yeah, Biden's going to unleash Kamala. Like the federal law enforcement is going to come down hard on these people. They pretty much ignore what's going on. And even with the federal law enforcement response to this, they're letting off these people who are firebombing federal courthouses, that are continuing to attack federal property. They don't care about the Antifa problem. This is like they're just ignoring it. So I think anyone who thought that Biden was worthy of support for anything besides maybe accelerationist reasons, which I don't really support accelerationism, and I don't think that accelerationist reasons are smart. I think they're ultimately worse is usually just worse. Believe it or not, this is a novel concept, but yes, that's usually the case. But I think there was a lot of people who would say this would be better for the right, but as we're seeing like mass arrests for people whose only crime was walking around the Capitol without permission and being held indefinitely, from the government demanding more domestic spying and more censorship, to these policies that are allowing a gigantic flood to come over our country through the southern border. The continual elevation of anti-white rhetoric and anti-white racism through government policy. I'm gonna have to say, Biden wasn't necessarily a good choice. I don't think, I don't think this is anything that's going beneficial for the right, unless from the other matter is that I do think, it probably is waking up a lot of people to our current situation. But at the same time, we're not even sure if that's going to be a good thing, or if not necessarily a good thing, but if it's like that's not necessarily, the way that we necessarily intended. That's an unintended effect of this, and none of the people who were arguing for Biden made this point. I think anyone who's like believing that we're going to return to normal, that everything's just going to be hunky-dory, that we're all just going to get along, and the Biden paradise is wrong. And we're going to continue to see worse things going on with Biden. I mean, this is a man who just turned, he turned 78 in December. He's going to continue to get older. I mean, he's going to, the pressures of the office are going to weigh down on him. We're eventually going to have to send him overseas to meet with foreign dignitaries. Even though he's using a lot of Kamala Harris to do this, I think we're going to see more gaffes and more embarrassments from Biden. And Biden did make his announcement this week that he plans on running for re-election when he will, if he's elected in 2024, he will be 82 on Inauguration Day. Is this really what we want? I mean, the media will lie for him and they will cover for him till the end of time. And it's kind of like when he tripped over the stairs recently. I mean, we did really see, a side of Biden that, they try to cover up. This is like showing him as a frail old man. And he has even trouble climbing the stairs. We're probably going to see a ton of more things like this over the next couple of years. And I think, it does have a psychic effect on America. We're seeing, somebody who's not even in control of his own body or mind, is losing grip on that, and he's in charge of the nation. And how can he expect somebody, to govern our nation when he can't even, go up a side of, stairs or remember his own notes? Like if he's meeting with, Angela Merkel. Well, Angela Merkel's not going to be German chancellor, but Emmanuel Macron, or other world leaders, is he going to have his notes every time he's talking with them? We're expecting him to just be a mouthpiece, and I guess it's working, in tandem with media collusion. But it's not. It's going to come out pretty bad when he actually has to interact with people who, not necessarily share the same biases and prejudices of the American chattering class. So I don't think it's only going to get worse from here. I think anyone who expected anything to bounce back under Biden, not going to happen. And we're in for this for a long haul. I mean, the supposed problems, whether real or imagined, of the Trump era are not just something unique to Trump or something that we're going to go away depending on who's president. These are long-term structural problems that are going to only get exacerbated in the coming years, and we're seeing that under Biden. And in some ways, this is making the national conversation move in our direction. But as I want to always say, worse is often worse, so we shouldn't necessarily. That is an unintended effect, and that's something to be positive about, be white-pilled about, but it is something to keep in mind. So that is the thoughts on old Uncle Joe. Now on to patron questions. As always, you too can get the power to ask me or a guest questions or suggest topics if you sign up for the highly respected Patreon's patron option. Of course, at highly respected's Patreon page. So this question comes from Mike. He asks, Scott, what do you think of JD Vance? Well, JD Vance, this is a great question because there's a lot going on here. JD Vance is likely going to run for the Ohio Senate seat. And if you don't know who JD Vance is, I assume most of our listeners are. He's the best-selling author of Hillbilly Elegy, which was just turned into a Netflix movie. It showed a sympathetic side to the plight of the working class whites, and he himself comes from a hillbilly area in Ohio. So he is considered. He's like. I mean, he's going to run. Peter Thiel put $10 million into a campaign for him, into a pack for him. So I'm pretty sure, it's not like, oh, I'm not going to run. And of course, he's sounding like a candidate. He just hasn't made his announcement yet. There's a lot to say about JD Vance. I don't want to necessarily say be positive. I'm going to take a more neutral stance on this because I agree with a lot of what Nick Fuentes is attacking him a lot for, and for good reason. But I'll go into the positive of him. JD Vance is running as a national populist. He is talking about most of our issues in a way, and he is going to be somebody who is going to, push against the tired old conservatism of the past. He is somebody who's looking at new ideas, fresh ideas. He's open to a lot of things that, Republicans, 5 or 10 years ago would have never considered. And we need candidates like that. If you look at him on any policy standard, what he says about immigration, he supports immigration reductions. If you look on foreign policy, he talks about how we need to be non-interventionist. We need to pull back from Afghanistan and all these places where our troops don't belong. He's also pretty good on trade policy, and he said, and he does engage in some of the culture war stuff that we're interested in. So I would say, if you looked at him on paper, and considering he's a best-selling author, he's got a certain celebrity status, I would say, he's good on that front. With the negative, there's a couple here. First off, I almost said Evan McMullen, but this is coming in there. JD Vance voted for Evan McMullen in 2016, and he went on to, call Trump vulgar. He could never vote for him in 2016. He was just repulsed by him. He wrote a New York Times column saying about how he loved Barack Obama, and he thought that the reason why conservatives didn't like him is because they're racist. He also just does not have the pugilist nature that we need from these candidates. Of people are going to say things that are politically incorrect. Now, he is saying things that conservatives would have never said in the past, but it's not necessarily because they're controversial or politically incorrect. It's just that that's not what Republicans were about. I mean, they were free market absolutists, and he is questioning that. So he does, but he doesn't. He doesn't really get it. That's the easiest way to say this is that in Trump, Trump became president, and he certainly became the Republican presidential candidate because he spoke for the fears and anxieties of the ordinary white Republican in a way that nobody else had ever done ever. And JD Vance doesn't necessarily speak for this because he imagines a much more nice guy Trumpism, where we're very respectable, we're not engaging, we're not calling Mexican immigrants rapists and drug dealers. We're just saying, oh, it's an economic issue, or we're just focused on class and economics. We're not going to get into the cultural identity stuff. That's not what Trump won on. This is a bowdlerization. This is imagining Trumpism as something that you can get a nice profile piece in the Atlantic from, but it's not going to electrify an audience in Dayton, Ohio, or Pulaski, Tennessee. These are not the places. This is not what whips up the Trump base. They were whipped up by the attacks on the Democrats. They love Trump's one-liners. They love Trump's tweets. Not necessarily JD Vance can emulate that, but they also loved his appeals to their cultural and identity and racial anxieties, which, as in the joke that liberals love to do whenever something racial happened during the Trump era, they're like, oh, the economic anxiety is out of control. Well, JD Vance believes it's all economics. And he's even making a class conflict argument. He delivered a speech to, I believe, the Ohio University, where he's begging college students to be traitors to their class and stand up for the working man, which, depending on Ohio University isn't necessarily one of the elite universities. A lot of these people are probably middle class, standard white Republicans. That is probably more Trump's base than this mythical working class that they always, pedestal. Which, if they ever ask like people what they think of the Trump working class, they think of it's like some steel worker ripped from the 1950s. He just stepped off the line. He used to vote Democrat, but now he's a Republican. And he really just cares about economic issues. He wasn't really animated by Trump's cultural and identity appeals, which, that's not really the case. A lot of our people are middle class, and I think people lose that in this inside of it, like saying the Republican Party is the working class party and we're the party of the worker. And it's like, well, I mean, this is better than saying we're the party of the country club, which that's what old Republicans would have said. You have to keep in mind that it's not necessarily a class conflict, and the majority of the people we're defending would consider themselves middle class or be in the middle class. And I think that a lot of this stuff that talking about working class and this class conflict distracts us from the important issues, or what really animates our movement and what we're trying to do. It's not necessarily we're trying to create the multiracial working class ideal state. We're trying to defend our people, who many of whom are middle class. I mean, there's several people. I mean, it cuts class. I think a lot of this class focus, when it's important when you're analyzing certain groups, like I think if you look at, the urban, white, professional, that person is usually the enemy. Okay. The affluent whites, generally upper middle class whites, generally are the enemy. I think we need to keep that in mind. And generally the people who assimilate into that, many of whom are Asian. I mean, most Asians are assimilated into that class. But it leaves us to this idea that somehow a blue collar white worker in some Detroit suburb has the same interests and shares more in common with some inner city black than they do with a more middle class person in a nicer suburb of Detroit. That's not necessarily the case. The two whites have far more in common than the stereotypical blue collar white worker with the inner city black. And I think, when they keep saying this thing about multiracial working class, like what the hell is that? Like there is not a multiracial working class. These people, and it's not like saying, oh, the regime is dividing you. The elites, the richer, are dividing you. It's like, no, they would be divided regardless of whether the elites were manipulating to divide them by race. And in any case, the elites side with non-whites over the white working class. I think JD Vance is to return to the main topic, I think he is largely good, despite his many faults. And also there's another thing that, a little bit awkward, and it's similar to the problems with Amy Coney Barrett, is that he himself does not have a white family. He has a mixed race family. One of the kids, it's with an Indian woman, and one of his kids even has an Indian name. Which well, he can do that, of course, but it does, shed a light on whether he can actually defend the historic American nation when when his family looks more like the new America. And he constantly talks about how he has a mixed race family to deflect any accusations that he's a white supremacist. And no one imagines he's a white supremacist. And it becomes like, I have a non-white child, I have a non-white wife, how dare you call me a white supremacist? It's just really cringe. And it does reflect in a way whether this person is committed to the same America that we want. When his family looks like the new America that's replacing our America. So that's something to keep in mind. But as you go along, compared to the other candidates in the Ohio Senate race, he's probably the best. Jane Timken is total establishment. We can't really trust her to fight for our issues. I think she humps Trump, and she's like, I'm really pro-Trump, but she doesn't deeply care about our issues. Josh Mandel is his campaign. He's operating like a caricature, a Stephen Colbert caricature of what a conservative would be like from 2008. Like he put out a poll saying, what do you think is a bigger threat, Muslim terrorists or Mexican gangbangers? And it's just done in such a crude and obviously not genuine manner that it's just silly. And he's a huge neocon. totally into the like massive foreign policy interventionism. The Trump movement is divided. A lot of those people a lot of the MAGA types love Josh Mandel. But Trump camp likes Jane Timken, and then another half of the MAGA camp likes JD Vance. So does Tucker as well. So there's like a divide there. And of the three, I would say, Vance probably the best. I would have said I think Mandel's running a stupid campaign. I don't know if he's really going to take off. Maybe he could get a lot of money. Maybe a lot of these MAGA types get behind him, but it seems like the Trump camp is behind Timken, which would doom Mandel. And I don't think he's going to get the type of money and attention that JD Vance is. So it really may come just down to Timken and Vance. And in that situation, I would pick, Vance. But Vance, is not the best candidate of Republicans running in 2022. And I don't want to pedestal him into a hero, into where he could then launch a presidential bid in 2024 or 2028, because I don't think he would make a great president. I don't think he would make a good presidential candidate. I don't think we necessarily want him moving beyond the Senate. He'd probably be okay in the Senate. I mean, if you want to compare him with somebody who is actually genuinely America first and representing Trumpism in its true essence, you would look to Mo Brooks, Alabama congressman who's running for the Senate there. Mo Brooks takes on the culture and identity issues. For years, he is talking about the war on whites. I think he first mentioned this in 2014 and 2015, long before Trump. He's like, there is a war on whites. And he's repeated that since then. He's somebody who was at the forefront of challenging the election and calling out the fraud. He is somebody who doesn't care about respectability. He cares about defending the historic American nation and representing the Trump base in its fullness. And and when it comes to economics, he's not necessarily this person, he's a lot of ways standard Tea Party in economics, but he gets that, there needs to be state intervention when it comes to tech censorship. And when foreign policy, I don't think foreign policy is one of his main issues. And a lot of those Tea Party types, they've moved in our direction on that. If you look at Ted Cruz, if you look at a lot of those House Freedom Caucus guys, a lot of those people are saying, why are we still in Afghanistan? Why are we involving ourselves in these parts of the world that don't concern America? I think that he could come around to our case on that. But when it comes to economics, I mean, it's more like what type of platitudes you're saying, because I don't think if JD Vance was a senator, he would really be proposing anything that overturns the GOP orthodoxy. There'd just be a difference of rhetorical flourishes, similar to what Josh Hawley operates in, and it's a way to get magazine profiles. But I think Mo Brooks gets Trumpism at its essence. He's not necessarily getting into the economic populism, but that doesn't matter. What matters more is the culture and identity issues. And he is, I think, one of the best Republicans on this in Congress. I don't think there's, maybe Paul Gosar, maybe a few others are better. But even really better, I don't know if they're just all equal. And so I don't think there would be he is what you want as an America First candidate, much more so than JD Vance. And I think we need more people like Mo Brooks rather than JD Vance. I think we already have Josh Hawley in the Senate. We already have Marco Rubio trying to pull off that act of being a respectable national populist. And Marco Rubio, it's such a joke because he continues to support invade the world, invite the world. So why would we want that? I think in conclusion, if you have to look, JD Vance probably the best Republican running in Ohio, but I don't want to turn him into a hero. I think we need to have a degree of skepticism towards him. And if you want to look at an America First model for running for office, look at Mo Brooks, look at Donald Trump. Don't necessarily look at JD Vance. Nobody gives a shit about the multiracial working class. They care about the war on whites, and only Mo Brooks is talking about that. JD Vance is not talking about that. So I think with that, we're going to conclude this highly respected. I will keep an eye out on all these subjects, particularly White Boy Summer. We're going to make sure it doesn't turn into Wigger Summer. We cannot let Chet Hanks' hip-hop style define it. We will assert ourselves. We will assert that it becomes a more preppier style, a more genuinely White Boy Summer. So we will keep an eye on that. So it's coming upon us. Weather is warming up, but right now it is not a white boy spring. But until next time, stay respected.